So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some of you. Welcome to our webinar on FileFly for Swarm. It's a product we just launched last week, and I am excited to have Tony Barbagallo with me and Glen Olsen. Tony and Glen, say hi.
Morning.
Hi, everyone.
I am Adrian Herrera. I'm the VP of Marketing. Before we start, we'll do a little housekeeping. You are free to ask questions throughout the webinar. Just go ahead and type them into the question dialog on the right. We probably won't get to them during the presentation, but we'll certainly have time for Q&A after the presentation. With that said, we have a lot of information to cover, so let's get started. So to begin, I just wanted to give you a real quick overview on Caringo. I know most of you are familiar with Caringo, but wanted to give you a refresher. We were founded in 2005. We've focused on storage software and software-defined storage for just about a decade now. And we've always focused on pure unified object storage. So that means object storage as the main foundation, and then multiple types of interfaces on top of our native HTTP interface. We're now at version 7.5. We're field hardened. We have hundreds of production installations. We have had installations and deployments up and running without issues for over 5 years. So we're extremely reliable, bulletproof, very simple from a management perspective. We focus on rapid, cost-effective, massive scale. And as I mentioned, we really do focus on effortless management. We try to eliminate complexity wherever possible. So we have hundreds of customers ranging from organizations that you rely on every day that you know and you use every day, all the way down to other organizations, small organizations that you may have not heard of, but they all get value from Swarm and our interfaces. We have unrivaled integrations. About 30 to 40 ISVs and multiple vertical solutions have integrated directly to Swarm. We also support the Amazon S3 API. So through that API support, we get another 100 to a few thousand applications that support the Amazon S3 API. And we are a recognized leader in the space. We have been for quite some time. And with that, I will pass it over to Tony to introduce you to FileFly.
Sure, thanks, Adrian. And yeah, it's an interesting question we've been hearing since really since we founded the company. Even if we have worked with organizations that have applications that they're interested in a native integration with object storage, so being able to access input and access their information via HTTP protocol and over the web. We still, as we get into discussions with those organizations, the question inevitably comes around that says, well, you know, I still have all these home directories, all these file systems, all these file server silos. Is there any way that I can take advantage of the scale-out storage that you're offering in your object storage solution for those environments? And you know, up until today, the answer's pretty much been a qualified no. But really the reason for that is that it's been very difficult to sort of marry those two universes with the file system hierarchical structure versus the flat object, flat address space that is provided with object storage. And really that is what we're addressing. And you know, since we've started, the problems have around file system storage have become more and more complex and exacerbated. In fact, we were speaking to a storage administrator of a large university who was literally just about to go buy another Windows-based file server, and he sort of coined the phrase for us. He said, you know, my file servers have just become kind of the corporate data junk drawer. I have a number of users, and I've done directory listings, and I'll say better than 80% of my files haven't been touched in over a year. And yet when I talk to users, they say all of their data is important. And you know, as this storage and system admin, I really can't make a pass judgment on what's important and what's not. All I know is that I've got over 80% of my data on my file servers that hasn't been touched in over a year, and it's taking up a lot of space, and now I'm having to go out and buy another file server. So that obviously leads to wasted budget. If there's a way that you could offload some of that information onto much more economical secondary storage, that could certainly save precious IT budget for use in other perhaps more strategic areas. Limited reuse and unlimited risk. Again, files in and of themselves in a giant file system, and of course if you have multiple file servers, now you're talking about different silos and mount points. Very difficult to search across those silos and mount points, difficult to analyze. Backup windows start to increase as numbers of files are increasing, whether accessed or not. They're still taking up space on the file system. And that really leads to, if you want to look for sort of data management solutions, they can be very complex from an integration standpoint. And at the end of the day, beyond a certain point, and it's different for everyone, but beyond a certain point, it's just very difficult to scale your traditional scale-up file servers like Network Appliance or any Windows-based file servers. So those are really the problems that we've seen in organizations that we've spoken with. And again, whether they have an object-based storage use case or not, we tend to see these same types of problems occur across the board in organizations and across verticals that we speak to. So what's the solution? And this is really what we're here to talk about, we just introduced Caringo FileFly, which is a pretty incredible solution in that it is really offering a seamless way in terms of its combination with our Swarm object storage repository solution, but is offering a seamless way to get the performance of Windows and NetApp filers and combine that with the simple, bulletproof, and limitless scale of Swarm. And I think probably the game changer that we've accomplished here is we have created a solution that accomplishes this without changing the way applications or users work, which means keep your existing mount points. No newer, different mount points for your end users. And we'll get into very specifically how we've accomplished that. So here's, and this is kind of the heart of the solution. Let me talk quickly on the left side about what the benefits are of this marriage between the file-based storage world and the flat address-based, object-based storage world that is scale out on the back end. So again, what we've created is transparent file access with no changes. We have native integrations with all Windows file servers, so anything that is running the Windows file system NTFS, as well as all NetApp file servers. So complete support for CIFS, so that's SMB 1, 2, and 3, as well as NFS. And you know, as I mentioned in some of those use cases, it could be up to 90% of your data on your file servers hasn't been accessed in quite some time. That data could be a prime candidate for moving transparently into Swarm object storage without your users ever actually knowing that you've done that. And as a system or storage administrator, what you gain is 90% of your capacity back on your existing file servers. We also allow you to consolidate files from many different file servers into that same single address space. And based on our calculations, we've estimated that the cost per gig in savings is about 4x versus having to purchase more primary storage in the form of a NetApp or a Windows file server. So let's take a look at the diagram here, and let me talk about the very specific use cases that FileFly is addressing. So on the left, you see what we call your hot files. Those are files which are accessed quite often. Yet, even with our FileFly solution, we have a, and by the way, FileFly, and Glen will get into this in a little while. But FileFly is a completely policy-based application. Once it's installed, you set policies, and then you can just forget it and walk away, and FileFly will do the rest. And we'll talk about those kind of policies. But one such policy would be, I would like to keep a copy of all of my files, and I would like to keep that copy, that secondary copy, directly in Swarm. So that's the notion of protection. And as an example there, we've been working with a very large bank that is using Swarm for their corporate repository. So all of their digital assets in their corporate organization they want to keep in our object storage platform. And again, we'll talk about why in a second, but in terms of the benefits of Swarm, of the Swarm platform. But then they also had told us that they had 1,800 branch offices, all with Windows file servers, and they had a recent need that they needed to store all of those assets back at corporate. So that's an excellent use case for FileFly, where you would just simply install FileFly on those Windows file servers in those branch offices and set a policy that perhaps on a every 24 hours copy all new or changed files from the file server over to Swarm at the corporate headquarters. In that scenario, there is no space reclamation, since it's just a straight copy. But what you gain is the erasure coding, the replication, how you choose to protect your data, which is very flexible on Swarm. You gain that level of protection. You gain a secondary storage for compliance, and perhaps even a secondary storage for disaster recovery, and even recovery from simple mistakes like accidentally deleting a file, etc. Now, the middle scenario is the one that we are most excited about, and in that scenario, again, all based on policy. You can set a policy, and let's use an example. I would like to set a policy that says move all files that haven't been accessed for the last 30 days, migrate them to Caringo Swarm. And what FileFly will do is leave a very small pointer on the file system itself and move the bulk of the data from the file, in fact, move the entire file over to Swarm. If a user does a directory listing, that user is going to see their files and their associated perceived amount of space that each of those files take up. Nothing will look anything different than before that migration. So the user sees absolutely no change. If they decide to access a file that has been migrated, behind the scenes and transparently, that file will be brought back from Swarm and put back on the local file system, on the local primary file server, and that user can interact with it as they choose. So in that scenario, again, if you have 80 or 90% of files that haven't been touched in the last 30 days, all of a sudden you are going to reclaim that space from your primary file server. And that's sort of the key scenario that we've set out to address with the combination of FileFly and Swarm. Now, I mentioned that use case of files not accessed in the last 30 days. You can also set a policy on any file attribute. Another example might be set a policy to run every 24 hours that migrates any file with the extension of .zip. So any zip file, migrate those over to Swarm. And typically, I mean, if you're like me, you double-click on a zip file and you extract the contents and you just leave the zip file laying around. So now essentially you have 2 copies of everything. So that would be a great candidate to migrate over. Now once that data is migrated over to Swarm, that's where the benefits of our scale-out object storage come into place. So those files are constantly protected. They're consolidated in a flat address space. Secondarily, you could search those files. So you could say, how many zip files do I have? What space is that taking up across my entire organization? So anything that have come over is analyzable via the metadata that is included with them, encapsulated with the object, searchable, and even can write the additional native object-based application to have those accessible via, for instance, your web or your mobile device, etc. And and let me just touch on the last use case before I turn it over to Glen, is that cold archive use case, which you may want to do a migration off of a primary file server and move all of that data directly onto Swarm, leaving no trace of it at all on the primary file server. So that would be that cold archive use case as well. With that, let me turn it over to Glen to go into more of a deeper dive in terms of the capabilities and sort of some comparisons of FileFly versus traditional gateways, etc.
Great, thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. So the first thing that we'll just quickly look at is FileFly versus traditional gateway. So Caringo also has what we'll call a traditional gateway product as well, and with that product we had it for a number of years, and there was a number of I wouldn't say problems, but there was a number of issues that came up with it over time. And one of the things that we wanted to do with FileFly was to come up with a solution that addresses these issues, or the things that our customers that use the previous product haven't liked so much over the years. Also, that product is very similar to all the other gateways out there that are offered by a lot of third parties and also other object storage companies. They're all very similar to our other products. So what makes it different is that what we found with traditional gateway approach of file to object is that generally they are Linux systems, and on top of that they use in Linux something called Fuse or a similar technology, and then they run something like Samba on top of it, and Samba is used to present the SMB or the CIFS share, and Samba also integrates with Active Directory if you want to. Now, there's a couple of things that we find there. One of them is performance, because these gateways, they only cache for a very, very short time the data being read and written. The data really mainly resides in your object store. So if I was to access a file right now, it would have to pull it back from the object store, but first of all it needs to pull it back, put it on the file gateway, on the local disk of the file gateway, and then I can start receiving that file. Now, if that file is a few gigabytes, or if it's a long way away, it can take a long time for that process to happen, for the file, the gateway to first take it from your local object storage, spool it locally, and then present it via Samba to me. So that was one of the first things we wanted to address, is to say, well, if the data is active and being accessed regularly, why do we want to keep removing it from the gateway? Why don't we leave the active data on the gateway until it's no longer active? And that way we'll give true file server performance, Windows or NetApp performance to our end users, which makes them a lot happier. And this also now allows you to have mixed use cases. So on a traditional object gateway, you can't have things like databases on them, because a database needs all the data all the time, so it can never be taken off the local gateway because it's open. Now this of course causes problems, because if the file never comes off your local gateway and it's in the cache, what happens if that gateway crashes? If you have a database on there, you will lose your database because it's never made it into the object store. Also, you may end up needing a lot of storage for these files, a lot more than you expected on the local gateways because of the way they're working. So with FileFly two things that we want to do. One was to give active data true nearline file server performance as people are used to today and what they expect. We also, of course, want to do that. We took, to take away these bottlenecks of having to stage the data, even if, the same file gets read 10 times in an hour. In that case, you definitely don't want it to have to keep taking it out of the object store 10 times. If it's, can just stay locally for that active data. So the other issue that we had with Samba was that, well, from a management perspective and for Linux, is a lot of our customers have very, very good Microsoft Windows Server and NetApp skills, but they don't have great Linux skills. Some of them do, but even those ones then have trouble with the Samba and the Samba implementation and integration into their Active Directory and their environment. And what you find is that the larger your Active Directory farm is, the more issues that you're going to have with Samba's integration to it. To the things where, maybe in Active Directory you disable a user, but that user that's been disabled, it doesn't make it all the way to the file server, to the Samba server for maybe a week. In which case, although you've disabled the user, they can still access the files for a week, which of course you definitely do not want. Or even if you add a group, it may take up to a week for that to make it to Samba. Now, to get around that with Samba, your IT people will often have to go into your Active Directory, onto your primary Active Directory servers and push out the synchronization, which again is a task that you don't want to do. So with FileFly, we looked at how can we get away from this? How can we integrate really well with file servers? How can we take advantage of the technology that is really good for file servers? And of course, Microsoft are the ones that developed the standard, the SMB standard, and their products work very well for that. So FileFly, actually, we say it enhances your file servers. It doesn't replace the file server function of your file servers. It enhances them to give them this extra level of tiering, which is the Caringo Swarm, and also provides this data protection method as well of it, making copies of your active data in Swarm as well. Now, when we take the objects from your file server and put them into Swarm, now we do this both when we protect the data, where we just make a full copy of it in Swarm as a backup copy, and also when we migrate the data or we tear the data from your primary to your secondary storage. On that object, we write some metadata. And the metadata that we write includes the name, the source original name of the file from the file server, the path that came from, that's C colon in the folder structure, the MIME type. So what we say, if it is a Word document, then in the metadata we say it is a Word document. If it's a PDF, we say it's a PDF. What this means is if you then access it directly as an object over HTTP, instead of it going into your downloads and then you need to double click on it and bring up in Word, because we're setting the MIME type, it will load it directly into Word. So you don't need to worry about finding your downloads and cleaning it up afterwards, whatever else. We additionally, you can have your content distribution, and this is where it does, if you do want to download it, or download it with your original name that was on the file server. We also put on the date created and modified, and these are the dates it's created and modified on the file server, not when it was created in the object store. So you know even from an object when it was created and last modified on your file server. Basic Windows attributes, also the owner of the file, and that can be the domain owner, and the source host, the name of the file server. Now what happens now with all this metadata is you can search on this metadata or a combination of this metadata in your object storage directly within using our index or a cloud scaler, and you can find the objects through that. So I can say I want to find the file called glen.txt, which was on this file server, and doing this search I can find that data and then access it directly through the object store. So what this gives you, even if you don't want it today and you're maybe in the future, what we're doing is we're giving you a bit of future proofing as well, where if you have applications that in the future want to become pure object, your data that has been put in through FileFly has everything you need in it for those applications in the future to find those objects in the object store without having to do another migration in a few years' time. Now, Tony covered a bit about the policies and how the policies are, and this just gives you a couple of screenshots, and one of them shows you where you create the policy rules, and which is on the left, and on the right hand side you've got the tasks when the tasks run. So if we look at the rules on the left, we can see a few things. So we can see the file matching, and this is where in this example we just have a star, and a star means match all files. So you can have multiple sources on a file server, and they can be different directories on different drives or different drives on different directories, and you can have different file servers, of course. But rules can span all these different sources, directories, and file sources as well, or they can work on just one. It's up to you. Now, along with that, you can say your files. So in here, we've got star, which will match all the files. I could do star.zip, and that would then just match zip files. I could do star.zip and star.tar, and then I would match tar and zip files, and I can go on like that as well, whatever combination I want for file matching. I can also say negate, which means not. So I could say, well, actually, I want to match all files other than databases. And that is how you can have multi-purpose data residing on your same FileFly managed shares and file systems, but only the data that you want to be migrated, which doesn't need to reside on your primary store to be migrated. Now, I had a really good question today, actually. I was talking to a prospect and saying, well, actually, what happens if my users has an access database which they're using all the time, but then they stop using it? I then want that to be migrated when they stop using it. And that's fine, because then you can do the combination where we can say, well, don't match database files unless they haven't been accessed for, let's say, a week. And then it won't match them only in the rule where they are a database file, but it has been accessed for a week. Otherwise, we'll leave it there. If the user a few days later decides, well, actually, I still want to use it, they open up their database, it will come straight back, and the user won't know that the data has been moved. We can do matching on the file size, so we can say, well, only match files which are at least this big or no bigger than this. On the date, so things like when it was created, when it was last modified, or when it was last accessed, the age of it. The owner of the file, so let's say if I was to leave the company, my IT administrator could say, well, I want to run a policy to migrate all Glen files directly into Swarm and take them off the primary storage. So that's a good way of being able to manage your files that belong to employees who may no longer be working for you as well. And of course, any of the attributes that are on the file we can match on as well. On the right-hand side, we have the policies, and what this the scheduling. And the schedule allows you to go down to the point where you can run it every minute. So you could have a policy running every minute, or the one you have there you can't see too well, but it's that policy runs at 5 minutes past 10 o'clock every day of the week. So you can have policies that go everywhere from running once a minute to, if you wanted to, you could say, I only want to run this on the last day of the year, so maybe 31st of December or whatever, or anywhere in between. So it's very flexible on both how you match rules of the data that you want to work with, and also when you can run this. And you can combine it as you like. There's many rules and policies and different schedules active at the same time. So you're not limited to just one of everything. You can have as many as you like. As we said, we integrate with Windows filers, which gives you native filer performance. It gives you the true SMB performance because we're not simulating it. Full Active Directory and Windows ACL support, which is another important thing with traditional file to object gateways is that often they mess up your file ACLs in Windows, especially as you get a lot of them. So we had one customer who worked really well until they had more than 16 ACLs on a file, and suddenly they found that by default Samba does not tool the underlying file system about any ACLs they have when there's more than 16. Our gateway actually dealt with that, but most gateways out there don't deal with that, and then they actually just drop the ACLs where there's more than 16 on a file. Mixed use case, of course, where you have data which is always active, such as databases, which always stays on your primary storage. Data that you want to exclude from smart tiering. You may have some data you say, well, actually, I just always want this on primary storage. You can do that. And maybe there is data which you may find is incompatible. We don't know of any at the moment, but if there is data that is incompatible with any applications, of course, unless it becomes inactive for a certain amount of time, you can say, well, let's just don't smart tier it. Let's leave it on the primary storage. And of course, some data can just be archived if you want to say. Nothing funny, just like Tony said, every day just move all the zip files off. You can do that, not a problem. We also integrate with NetApp filers. All the rules for Windows remain, and we integrate natively through NetApp on tap through something called fPolicy. fPolicy is a API that NetApp publishes, so we're not doing anything that NetApp doesn't want us to do. We're following all their rules and using their best practices, and actually the product has been certified to work on NetApp as well. We support NetApp running in either 7 mode or C, or the new clustering mode. In 7 mode, it needs to run on tap of at least 736 up to 8.2.x. In C mode came out in NetApp ONTAP 8 and above. And from ONTAP version 8.3, they stopped support for 7 mode. So all new NetApps actually do run in cluster mode, but we still also support 7 mode for the older NetApps as well. And a question that we often get is, do we support NetApp snapshots? And the answer is yes, we fully support NetApp snapshots, so you don't need to worry about that. When you want to do it with a NetApp, you do need at least one Windows server, and that can be an existing Windows server. In fact, for all the Firefly components, there's no reason to deploy a new Windows server. Any existing Windows servers that meet the basic requirements can be used. In the case of the NetApp, we need it for the admin portal and the fPolicy server and what we call the storage gateway. And we'll look at these processes and what they do a little bit more in a second. Now, as we said, FileFly, we had some real issues that we wanted to solve, and we believe that we have solved these with FileFly. And actually, the feedback that we have got has been very good and indicates that we have, to the point that a lot of our customers that had our previous traditional file to object gate solution are moving very fast and migrating FileFly because they believe it is a much better solution for them than a traditional file to object gateway out there. So of course, by doing this, it does, one of the great things for them is that it decreases the backup windows because the data protected by FileFly does not need to be backed up using traditional backup software anymore. So of course it does save costs on your backup software licensing, on your maintenance of that, and of your operation. And of course, if you were backing up to tape, then you've got the issue of the cost of tapes and also the management and storage of those tapes. We resolve the issue of how do you integrate between file and object, and that is your primary storage. How do you make your primary storage as today and your applications that you have today work with object storage, and FileFly is the solution that meets that requirement. Now, large drive size, one of the things that you get, and a good example is with NetApp. NetApp a few years ago, when the large drives came out, for like a 4 terabyte drive, NetApp said that you should expect a 4 terabyte drive rebuild time to take up to 10 days. Now, that's a huge amount of time when if you lose another drive in that 10 days, you may end up not just losing a bit of data, but you may lose your complete RAID set that has the failed drives in and lose all your data, which is, a big risk. Now, the way that Swarm works is when a drive fails in Swarm, every storage node in the cluster participates in rebuilding the protection that was on that failed disk. So to give an example, whereas NetApp said that it could take up to 10 days to rebuild the protection from a 4 terabyte drive, with Caringo Swarm, that same rebuild of that protection will complete in a number of hours. So we're talking hours to rebuild large drives that have failed, whereas with traditional storage like NetApp's and that, you're talking days. So it does give you much better security on your data as well, the way that we make sure your data is protected. The use case of your primary storage become a junk drawer, well, just move all the data that is classed as junk off your filer and put it into Swarm. And lost files is a good example. Over time you forget where you put your files, and people come and go, and projects start and end, and maybe sometimes I do this often a year or two down the track. I'm like, where did I put my file? I can't find it anymore. Once you've got the files in Swarm using our indexer, you can search for it, and when you search for it, you can either access the object through the file, or actually, because we put the metadata on, we can use that metadata, and you can look at the metadata from the search, which points you then back to the exact file server and folder that file belongs in. And more than that, when you come to things, if you want to, you can do things like run Hadoop jobs on all your file system data, because when we move the data into Swarm, we're creating one pool of data from all your FileFly servers, and then you can actually use our Hadoop interface to actually run a job, MapReduce job, which then, of course, works on all the data from all your file servers in a single job. Otherwise, you would have to run separate jobs and do data management. So it's another great way to actually bring all your data into a central place to do, real valuable things with that data. Quickly, we'll just talk about the components of FileFly. If we look at the bottom, we have Caringo Swarm, and next to that we have CloudScaler. So CloudScaler, FileFly works both with Swarm and CloudScaler. CloudScaler is what people use when they want to do true multi-tenancy. And what we mean by true multi-tenancy is where they want to track usage and put quotas, etc., on the storage. And maybe, at the end of the month, they want to bill or cross-charge the department for the storage they've used. CloudScaler also gives you additional protection of your objects when you're accessing them natively, and CloudScaler does, of course, integrate into Active Directory as well. So you can have CloudScaler authenticating off exactly the same Active Directory as FileFly to make sure you have your single authentication source. Above that, we have what we call the FileFly gateways, and these are storage gateways. And what these do is they talk the native object API. So when the agent above them, either the F policy server or the Windows agent, wants to send or receive data from Swarm, those agents connect to the gateway. They send the data to the FileFly gateway, and the gateway then talks to Caringo Swarm, which could be through CloudScaler, a native object. Above that, we have the admin portal, and that's worked. We saw a couple screenshots of before. and that's where you create your policies and manage everything. It gives you a single pane of glass where you can manage your entire Firefly infrastructure from one place. The Windows agent you install on your Windows servers. In fact, all the Firefly components you see here, if you have one Windows server, you can install them all on that one Windows server, and you don't need anything else. But for scale, maybe to scale it out, you will have 2 or more object storage gateways, and then you will just put a Firefly agent onto each of your Windows servers, or you may have a couple of policy servers which your NetApps share and use them. So all the Firefly components can be shared around your infrastructure. You don't need to have individual components for individual filers, and you can scale it as you need for demand as well. And last of all, before I hand back, we'll just quickly look at minimum system requirements. So if we're talking about just the components where we want to run, let's say, the F policy, the admin portal, and the storage gateway on either separate or on the same Windows server, then that Windows server doesn't need a lot of additional resources. It needs, we say, reserve a gig of RAM for it, or have a gig of RAM available for all the Firefly components. 5 gig of disk space, and that disk space is just for log files. Nothing else is used for it. It's just for log files. Clock sync, we recommend that you synchronize your clock off your Windows server with the same time source as your Swarm cluster. And all the components can be virtualized. There's no reason for them to be virtualized. We fully support all the Firefly components to run on virtual Windows servers as well. If you wanted to deploy a new Windows server today and put on it all the Firefly components and then turn it into a Windows file server, here's an example of what you could use. You would need either a virtual or a physical file server, server. We would recommend 6 CPU cores and Windows 2012 R2 just because it's the latest version of Windows. 12 gig of RAM is a good minimum to start with. And we say here, enough storage to store up to 45 days plus, but actually a lot of our customers store a lot less than that. Some of them are only storing 10 days. We have some which actually only store 1 day. So, these are not hard and fast rules. We say RAID protect because your primary storage needs to be RAID protected because it changes during the day and it may change before a Firefly policy makes a protected copy of it within Swarm, and dual gigabit Ethernet or better. But what we really are saying here is size a Windows file server as you would size that file server without Swarm. So if you have, 100 concurrent users accessing the file server, then you'll probably need, a little bit of a beefier server. But actually maybe, is you don't, and you can use this. But what we say, there's a lot of best practices out there for sizing a Windows file server, in which case size the file server as you would otherwise without Firefly Swarm, because Firefly Swarm needs such low requirements of resources on the file server that they'll be fine. Yep. And the last thing is that anybody who has an existing Swarm cluster, you do need to upgrade to version 7.5.2 or higher to run Firefly, as we have made some changes to Swarm to integrate with it. Thank you for now, and I will pass back.
So thanks, Glenn. So once on Swarm, so Glenn and Tony just walked you through FileFly. It's a Windows-based application, very easy to use. You can deploy it within 30 minutes. And on the back end, it uses Swarm. So you get all of the benefits of Swarm. At a very high level, Swarm reduces your risk. It increases your operational flexibility. It reduces your costs, and it's bulletproof. So your employees, your users won't be waking you up at night because of storage issues. You won't find yourself on the front page of New York Times because you can't provide information fast enough. And we do that by these 4 different things. So number 1, you can expand capacity and performance in minutes. Number two, storage management is tedious. Let Swarm do it for you. As mentioned before, we extract complexity wherever possible. Truly is, once you have Swarm up and running, you just rack, boot, and store. We have a use case where one of our customers wanted to combine two very large clusters, and they wanted to see what a ProServe engagement would cost. And we told them just plug it into the same network, and they'll find each other and combine. And that's what they did, and the benefit that they got by using Swarm. You can search and see your files in new ways. So as mentioned before, we store metadata with information. This is important for all information, specifically with FileFly. Glen went over the file system information that you can capture. You can also store custom information and then analyze all that information at once. You can run ad hoc search queries. You can see those results in JSON or in XML. So it's highly customizable. And of course, we provide continuous protection. We do this differently than everyone else. It's patented. You're able to seamlessly shift from replication to erasure coding, all on the same hardware. You do not need to specify logical or physical separation of hardware infrastructure. This goes into more detail on the technology that we provide. I won't go over each bullet, but I will say this is all-inclusive software. It runs from RAM. So with some of our competitors, you need to specify different drives for metadata database. You need to specify different drives for operating system and different drives for the actual content. When you're all said and done, you're giving up anywhere between 15 to 20% of your capacity in a server up to run the software. That's not the case with Swarm. The software runs from RAM. You use up to 95% of the actual drive for content. Swarm architecture, all nodes do the same thing. So as a cluster grows, processes like recovery become faster because all nodes participate. As mentioned, we take a true object approach. We do not have a metadata database. Databases get brittle with size. You need to protect them. You need special administration skills to manage and maintain your database. We do not have a metadata database. All metadata is stored with the object itself. And of course, elastic content protection, as I mentioned, this is patented. We do it differently than everyone else. We make it very simple to use. Now, the combined solution, FileFly and Swarm, addresses all of the concerns that we presented at the front of the presentation. So you consolidate your files on one bulletproof, limitless storage platform that has been proven in the market. It's been market hardened over the last decade. It's being used by some highly secure deployments worldwide, like by the Department of Defense and other organizations like that. So it's rock solid. You save a minimum 4 times when compared to scale-up solutions. You can install Swarm on any mix of commodity hardware. You can start with a few terabytes if you want. We do not have a limit. You can scale at your own pace. You can search and provide access, secure access to data. So as mentioned, once you have all your files consolidated, you get the benefit of Swarm on the back end, not only through HTTP, but we also have a Hadoop connector. So now you can run Hadoop or MapReduce jobs on the information stored on Swarm. We also have a number of other interfaces that you can use. You streamline backup and recovery with continuous protection. So as Tony and Glenn mentioned, you move the majority of information from your file server to Swarm. What that does, it decreases the amount of data stored on your file server, which reduces your backup windows. It also makes recovery faster. So in the case if you do run into an issue on your file server, you do not need to move the majority of information back because most of it is on Swarm already. It also significantly reduces disk I/O, which we have heard as a really good benefit for especially Windows storage server administrators. If they're looking for a way to reduce disk I/O, this is a way to do it. And all this is automated. So we showed you how you can do this all policy-based, how you can mix and match policies. You can set it and forget it. You walk away, and then you benefit from the bulletproof nature and all the automation and management, self-management of Swarm. And at the heart of this is being able to scale out, way out. to hundreds of petabytes and trillions of objects and beyond. Swarm is truly highly scalable, and you can do this all on any mix of commodity hardware. So, if you're using Dell, go ahead and use Dell. If you're getting a better deal from maybe SGI or Cisco, you can go ahead and combine those different types of servers. And with that, that's where we're closing. We're opening it up for QA, but before that, next steps. We have put together a quick start package. You can contact your Caringo representative for information on that quick start package. If you do not have a Caringo representative, just email any one of us here or filefly@caringo.com. We can start with a free trial. We can do an assessment, whether your use case will work. We can also walk you through a demo of FileFly. So there's a lot of additional information that we have that we can share with you, but we wanted to keep this webinar within an hour.